In literature, there's a common storytelling device known as the unreliable narrator. It's a character whose version of events can't be taken entirely at face value. Sometimes they're lying. Sometimes they're confused. Sometimes mental illness, bias, trauma, or self-interest distort the story they're telling. The audience is left with a difficult task, separating what actually happened from what the narrator believes happened. The problem with unreliable narrators is that they aren't always wrong. Sometimes they tell the truth, and sometimes that's what makes them dangerous. Over the last 2 episodes, we've watched Jon Stewart build a reputation as a career criminal, a violent offender, an escape artist, a manipulator, and a man who seemed incapable of staying out of trouble for more than a few weeks at a time. We've watched him lie. We've watched him reinvent himself. We've watched him claim that doctors misunderstood him, that police misunderstood him, and that nearly every bad decision he'd ever made was somehow someone else's fault. And yet, we've also watched something else. We've watched him provide information that turned out to be true. We watched him warn people about events before they happened. We watched him place himself uncomfortably close to crimes, investigations, conspiracies that all later seemed to unfold exactly as he described. So what do you do with a man like that? A man who lies, a man who manipulates, a man who craves attention, a man who always seems to be standing at the center of the story, and a man who occasionally appears to know things that he shouldn't. Jon Stewart thought that he had cracked the code. A few well-placed truths had earned him something he'd spent most of his life chasing: attention. Reporters were listening, and police were listening. People who had spent years dismissing him suddenly wanted to know what he knew. But Jon was about to discover a harsh reality. A few well-placed truths cannot undo a lifetime of lies, because there was one accusation that would follow him for the rest of his life. One attempted murder, one conviction, one event that transformed a troublesome criminal into a deeply paranoid man with an obsession. For the rest of his life, Jon Stewart would insist that he had been framed, and most people didn't believe him. But that accusation left him with something else. A habit. An obsession, really. Jon Stewart wanted people to know where he was. He wanted witnesses, he wanted records, and he wanted proof. Because if another crime occurred, Jon Stewart intended to be ready. Years later, when the Whiskey A Go-Go burned, investigators would discover just how far that obsession had gone. Today, we're examining the event that fueled Stewart's paranoia, the relationships he believed had betrayed him, and the warnings that would eventually place him at the center of one of Australia's most infamous criminal investigations. This is Foretold, Australia's Whiskey A Go-Go Fire Part 3, on Crime to Burn.
So it's not the conclusion?
Nope.
Okay, this is gonna go forever.
Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark, sooty landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and the unfortunate soul tasked with sorting through a story where everyone appears to be lying, including the guy who might be telling the truth.
And I'm the meat marauder and mix master.
If you're new here, this is part 3 of our Whiskey A Go-Go series, and I highly recommend going back and starting with part 1 unless you prefer your stories completely bass-ackwards. No judgment either way. Some people put milk in before the cereal. I am not here to tell you how to live.
Hey, lots of people watch Tarantino movies.
If you're enjoying this series, we desperately need your help finding our audience. And there are a few ways you can pitch in. They're free, they're simple, and they might help you get better parking spaces, but your results may vary. All you have to do is hop into your podcast player of choice and leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and/or an episode comment. As of the scripting of this episode, we were up to 78 ratings on Apple Podcasts, still no new written reviews, and 75 ratings on Spotify. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time to do that. Apple and Spotify ratings are by far the biggest help when it comes to discoverability, but honestly, we'll accept your praise on any platform where you are willing to leave it. There's no new comments on Spotify this week, but we do have a bumper crop over on Podbean. Actually, there are new comments since I scripted this, but we'll have to cover them next week because I didn't put them in the script. M and Sophie Brown appear to be engaged in an unofficial competition for Best Australian Fan. Both of you left multiple comments, and since this entire series exists because you guys asked for more Australian cases, I appreciate the heck out of you. Kevin Tarrant, thank you for your thorough psychological assessment of our suspect. Just Becky, it's always a delight to see you in the comments. And over on YouTube, we had it first. Someone offered me a job as a fire investigator, which is either a tremendous compliment or a horrifying misunderstanding of how much free time I actually have. I'd also like to publicly acknowledge that Melanie Curtis agrees with me about tomatoes unexpectedly bursting in your mouth. Thank you for the validation. I feel seen.
They're just seeds, Melanie.
And Glory, your stickers are in the mail. I have made my triumphant return to social media this week, so thank you to everyone who has liked, shared, commented, favorited, reposted, or otherwise interacted with our content. Overcoming the algorithmic gatekeepers depends entirely on our fans repeatedly poking the internet and yelling, "Hey, look at this." So thank you for supporting us on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. We sure do appreciate it. And don't forget to show your support by heading over to our spread shop and grabbing yourself some Crime to Burn merch. The link is in the show notes. Financial support for the show is never required. Crime to Burn will always be free on your favorite podcast platform, supported by ads. But if supporting the show is financially feasible and you'd like your Steve gland activated, you can head over to Patreon and join the Cult of Steve, where you will receive ad-free episodes and several sticky things. And as always, you can send us your feedback, case suggestions, fire stories, and tell us what makes you most paranoid by emailing us at crimetoburn@gmail.com. Although after spending several weeks researching Jon Stewart, I would caution you against becoming too paranoid, because that's sort of how we got here. And where is here? This is Australia, 1973. A few months after an empty nightclub called Torino's was firebombed, and just days after the Whiskey A Go-Go nightclub was deliberately set ablaze, killing 15 people. So far, we've learned that the whiskey fire was no accident. It was arson, an intentional attack carried out with gasoline poured into the club's main entrance, effectively turning the primary means of escape into a wall of fire. We've also learned police quickly focused their attention on one man, Jon Stewart. Why? Because Jon Stewart had warned them it was going to happen. According to Stuart, that fact should have cleared him of suspicion. After all, why would he spend months warning police reporters and nightclub owners about a crime he intended to commit himself? But as we learned last week, Jon Stewart wasn't exactly the most reliable witness to his own life. By that point, he'd already established a reputation as a career criminal, an escape artist, a habitual troublemaker, and a man who seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to find himself at the center of everyone's problems. He also had a habit of feeding information to police and reporters. Sometimes that information was self-serving, sometimes it was manipulative, and occasionally it turned out to be true. That habit eventually brought him into contact with a colorful journalist named Brian the Eagle Bolton, a reporter with connections that seemed to extend both into Brisbane's criminal underworld and elements of the police force. Because Queensland policing during this era carried persistent allegations of corruption, favoritism, and cozy relationships with organized crime figures. Whether those allegations were true, exaggerated, or somewhere in between depended largely on who you asked.
We're not sure who was the big spoon, who was the little spoon.
Jon Stewart, however, had no doubts, and over time he became increasingly convinced that powerful people were operating behind the scenes. People who wanted him silenced, people who wanted him blamed, people who, according to Stewart, had already framed him once before. And that brings us to the event that would define the rest of Jon Stewart's life. It all started because a big, bad man had his ego bruised. And that simply would not do. That man was Lenny McPherson, one of the most notorious figures in Sydney's criminal underworld. His rival was a standover man named Jacky Steele. Now, for those unfamiliar with the term, a standover man is essentially a professional intimidator. The guy who shows up to convince you that paying for protection is a much better idea than discovering what happens if you don't pay for protection. Both men operated in organized crime circles, but they approached the business very differently. According to numerous accounts, McPherson's success depended in part on relationships with corrupt police officers. The allegations varied depending on who was telling the story, but the general claim was that McPherson supplied information on his criminal rivals, enjoying a degree of protection in return, and the police were able to share in his profits, allegedly. Steele, on the other hand, did not appear to share McPherson's enthusiasm for acting as a police informant. And in the criminal underworld, being labeled a police informer could be almost as dangerous as being arrested. Then, in 1965, a satirical magazine called Oz decided to have a little fun. The publication released a tongue-in-cheek ranking of Sydney's top 20 underworld figures. Jacky Steele landed at number 1, and Lenny McPherson came in second, which was probably irritating enough on its own, but the magazine did not stop there. It also described McPherson as a fizz gig, which is Australian slang for a police informer.
It's a rat.
And according to multiple accounts, Steele thought this was absolutely hilarious. He reportedly purchased multiple copies of the magazine and used them to publicly mock McPherson. Now, most adults would probably respond to the situation by rolling their eyes and moving on with their lives, but Lenny McPherson was not most adults. His response was considerably more dramatic. According to investigators, McPherson decided that the appropriate remedy for his bruised ego was murder. At approximately 8 p.m. on November 26, 1965, Robert Lawrence Jacky Steele left his home in Sydney. Moments later, a car carrying 4 men pulled alongside him and opened fire. The first shotgun blast struck Steele in the abdomen, and oddly enough, that blast is likely the thing that saved his life.
Holy
Because the force of the blast knocked him to the ground, and a second shotgun blast was fired almost immediately afterward and passed through the space where his head had just been moments earlier. That's not the sort of thing you appreciate until much later, but Steele was very much in the middle of being murdered, and despite suffering a shotgun wound to the abdomen, he managed to get back to his feet and run towards his apartment building. And his attackers continued firing, and at least one .22 caliber round struck him in the back as he fled.
22 caliber.
Yeah. So shotguns and .22 caliber, I guess they were...
There's a, like, was it some yin and yang?
I don't know.
Like, what?
A big spread.
Well, we're gonna have everything here, you know. And who was chasing them?
4 men. I'm going to get to who police think they are.
Okay.
But Steele made it inside. Unfortunately, one of the gunmen followed him. Now, I don't know exactly what was going through Jacky Steele's mind in that moment, but apparently his response to being shot repeatedly was to grab a conveniently located brick and throw it at the man that was trying to kill him.
Respect! Yes! That's awesome.
It is.
Respect, bro.
Now, I have no idea whether the brick actually connected with the attacker, but the gunman did retreat. And Steele was able to get into his apartment, and he eventually made it to medical care. And despite every effort to the contrary, he survived. The injuries were severe. He had a collapsed lung, a perforated bowel, obviously massive blood loss, and more than 30 projectile wounds from shotgun pellets and .22 caliber rounds.
Holy crap.
Under normal circumstances, those are the kinds of injuries that result in a much different ending. But surgeons were able to save him, and the press promptly dubbed him the Iron Man. And Jacky Steele appeared more than willing to lean into the nickname. Following the shooting, he portrayed himself as little more than a quiet gambler who couldn't imagine why anyone would want him dead. According to Steele, the attack was probably just a case of mistaken identity, which is certainly one theory. Another theory is that when 4 armed men arrive in a car, shoot you more than 30 times and chase you into your building and continue trying to kill you after you've already been shot, they probably know exactly who they're looking for. And just about everyone in Sydney had an opinion about who was behind the shooting. Jacky Steele had accumulated no shortage of enemies over the years. But given the very public feud and recent humiliation, many eyes naturally drifted toward Lenny McPherson. John Stewart's eyes certainly did, because Stuart would later become convinced that the investigation wasn't really about finding the people who shot Steele, it was about finding someone to blame. According to Stuart, police just needed a result, a conviction, something to put in the headlines. And in his version of events, they had found the perfect candidates: Raymond Patrick, Ducky O'Connor, and John Andrew Stewart. And no, I don't know why he was called Ducky.
I wasn't even going to ask.
O'Connor was a Sydney standover man who frequently found himself at odds with McPherson's interests. And Stuart, as we know, was a career criminal with a lengthy record and few friends in law enforcement. According to Stuart, that made he and Ducky ideal suspects, or ideal scapegoats, depending on who you believe. So on New Year's Eve 1965, police arrested both men and charged them in connection with the Steele shooting. What happened next would become one of the central disputes of Stuart's life. O'Connor refused to cooperate. He refused any plea deals, and he refused to assist prosecutors, and ultimately, the case against him collapsed. Stuart took a different path, because he was facing the probability of a life sentence. So, on the advice of his lawyer, he agreed to plead guilty to maliciously wounding Steele. But that plea earned him a 5-year sentence. For police, the case was effectively solved. For John Stuart, it was just the beginning. Because for the rest of his life, Stuart would insist that he had pleaded guilty not because he was involved in the shooting, but because he believed he had zero chances of receiving a fair trial with the corrupt police, prosecutors, and court system. And from that moment forward, he became obsessed with proving that powerful people had framed him. And here's where things can get really complicated, because if this were only John Stuart claiming he'd been framed, it might be easy to dismiss, because criminals claim they're innocent all the time. But over the decades, the Steele shooting has become one of the more controversial convictions in Australian criminal history. While it can never be proven with absolute certainty that Stuart was framed, many researchers, journalists, and students of Australian organized crime now regard it as highly likely that he was. In other words, John Stuart may have spent a long time in prison obsessing over a conspiracy that actually happened. And once somebody believes they've been wrongfully framed for a crime, they start to see conspiracies everywhere. Real ones, imagined ones. And eventually, it can become difficult to tell the difference. Perhaps especially so for someone that had been diagnosed with a severe personality disorder, and with Stuart's history of both family and institutional violence.
What was it diagnosed with?
It just said severe personality disorder. They don't give us any specific
ADD or
things.
something like that.
Yeah, this was also in 1973, and he was diagnosed in the 1960s.
So this is like 4 iterations of the DSTM bag.
Exactly. Now, Stuart served longer than 5 years because he was also convicted of a sexual offense around the same period, so he ultimately remained incarcerated until 1972. A month before his release, his old friend Brian Bolton had a brand new John Stuart story to publish. The headline read, quote, "Plot to bomb the Opera House. Criminal plans kamikaze dive," unquote. That's not generally the sort of headline you want associated with your upcoming parole, but according to Bolton's reporting, Stuart had developed a plan. Unless the New South Wales Police Commissioner agreed to review the Steele case, Stuart intended to charter an aircraft, load it with gelignite.
What is that?
I'm going to tell you. It's the next paragraph.
I've never heard the story.
I didn't either. I had to Google it. Load it with gelignite and bomb the Sydney Opera House, and then crash the plane into either a crowded beach or a sporting venue.
Not the Sydney Opera House. No! That place is amazing. Don't. Stop it, douchebag.
So gelignite is also called blasting gelatin or blasting jelly, and it's
Okay, I understand that.
Yeah, it's an explosive that's primarily used in mining and quarrying.
Yeah. They use that in Fight Club.
Oh, okay. So as his release approached, the details of his plan evolved a little, and Stuart reportedly announced that he would simply learn to fly himself, load the aircraft with explosives, circle the Opera House, and demand over the radio that authorities reopen the Steele investigation, and if they refused, he would just crash the airplane into the Opera House.
Holy... That is an ambitious plan.
So this is what he's telling everyone that will listen, including reporters at this point.
It's a bold plan, Cotton.
So yes, John Stuart was making terroristic threats. And yet a short time later, he was released from prison. Authorities clearly weren't convinced he was about to become Australia's first airborne supervillain, but they weren't entirely comfortable ignoring him either. So following his release, Stuart was reportedly placed under surveillance. So now we have a recently released prisoner with a violent past making terroristic threats, believing an organized crime boss is out to get him, and that police were working with that crime boss, and so he was paranoid and now under surveillance, which is just the perfect combination.
Hey, man, that is a really heavy Thursday.
It is. So the result was a man who became increasingly convinced that the underworld intended to kill him, especially Lenny McPherson. According to Stuart, it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. So he stopped going out alone. He became obsessed with locks. He refused to even open a door if there was a light behind him that could cast his silhouette into view, because in his mind, a silhouette was exactly the sort of thing a hitman might be waiting for. When he finally did start venturing out by himself again, he developed another habit. Every time he changed locations, he would call a family member just to let someone know where he was, just in case. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, that sounds a little paranoid, I would agree with you, but the story gets weirder. Because not long after his release, Stuart reached out to Detective Sergeant First Class Basil Hicks of the Queensland Crime Intelligence Unit. Unlike many of the police officers we've discussed throughout the story, Hicks had a reputation for being one of the good ones. Even people who distrusted the police often seemed willing to make an exception for Basil Hicks. During their conversation, Stuart complained about his treatment in prison. He reiterated that he did not trust the police, and then he asked a fairly simple question. Were the police going to leave him alone?
I lost you a bit.
Okay.
Like, who's Basil Hicks?
So he was a police officer, but he worked for CIU, that's the unit that's like internal affairs. He's the guy that's investigating allegations against other police officers. And he was approached multiple times through his career and tried to persuade to the dark side, and he always refused.
Approached by whom?
The corrupt cops to try to bring him into the fold of supporting organized crime.
How did that get documented?
That is a really good question, but it's documented well in the book. And if you actually read up on...
So this is not speculation.
It's the people that have studied organized crime in Australia during this time think that Hicks was one of the good officers, and his career really did suffer for it, but he was the guy that investigated the guys that were accused of being corrupt.
Okay.
So John Stuart wanted to know from Basil, was he going to be left alone, or were the police trying to nab him again? So Hicks reportedly told him that, stay out of trouble and the police are going to leave you alone, which is a perfectly reasonable answer. But then Hicks received another phone call, and this one came from Brian Bolton, the reporter. The guy that Stuart had been talking to now for nearly a decade. And Bolton was very concerned. According to later accounts, he said that he believed Stuart was obsessed with revenge and had compiled death lists. And he had access to firearms and was actively looking to settle those old scores.
Death lists?
Yeah.
Well, what does this mean? What is a death list?
This was, according to Bolton, this was a list that Stuart made of people he intended to kill to get revenge for his wrongful conviction.
Can he put that he jotted that down in a notebook or
This is coming from Bolton.
But is this a physical...
I don't know if
notebook or what are we talking about?
He didn't say. He just said that he knew
he had a death list.
He knew that
so it's either arbitrary or it's physical, right?
Yeah, he said that Stuart had told him he had a list of people he was going to kill to get back for his wrongful conviction.
And he found this list under a rock or...
No. Stuart is still talking to Bolton because Bolton's that reporter that gives him all this attention, right?
Right.
So he told Bolton, oh yeah, I've developed this list of people, then I'm going to get them all.
Oh, so it's definitely a potentially hypothetical list.
It's potentially hypothetical.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not I found your grocery list. You're going to get some cabbage and kill them off.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was like that. So Bolton believed that Stuart was obsessed with getting revenge, and he had compiled death lists, and he had access to firearms, and he was actively looking to settle some old scores. And Bolton also believed that there was a very good chance that his own name appeared somewhere on that death list. He was allegedly terrified of John Stuart at this point. And this is where the story starts to take a sharp turn into what is happening, because Bolton allegedly offered Officer Hicks a solution to this problem. He said that if the police wanted Stuart gone, Bolton could arrange it. All he needed was for Hicks to give him a Christmas present. And that Christmas present needed to be a gun.
Are we just going to set him up with a firearm? Because
He's asking the police to set him up with a firearm to murder John Stuart.
some solicitation into some weird right there, man.
And this is the one police officer in this area that is reported to be like straight and narrow, not corrupt. And this is the one he reaches out to. So before anyone asks, no, Detective Hicks did not provide a firearm so a journalist could organize a murder. But I would like to pause for a moment and appreciate the cast of characters that we've assembled. We have a recently released prisoner convinced that organized crime wants him dead, a reporter who appears to be floating freelance assassination proposals, and a police officer with the reputation for honesty trying to navigate whatever this conversation has become. And Stuart hadn't even reached his full weirdness yet. This was just the paranoia appetizer. Around this time, Stuart reconnected with an old criminal associate named Billy McCulkin. Now, before we go any further, I feel obligated to tell you that multiple sources describe McCulkin as having a tattoo of a mouse on his penis that allegedly transformed into a rat under very specific circumstances.
Whoa.
I'm going to let you use your imagination on that one.
Well, if you're a grower, not a shower.
So this story is already weird enough, and I have no desire to spend the next 5 minutes discussing the life cycle of a penile rodent.
That's not even a thing. It's not a thing, man. There's no penile rodents.
Over the following weeks, Stuart continued meeting with Detective Basil Hicks, and Hicks documented these conversations. And they paint a picture of a man who was becoming increasingly obsessed. Stuart constantly talked about the conditions he experienced in prison. He talked about the Steele conviction. He talked about McPherson. He talked about how he was being watched and how there were people trying to kill him. And occasionally, he talked about flying an explosives-laden aircraft into the Sydney Opera House. Still, you know, normal post-prison adjustment stuff. And at one point, Stuart even handed Hicks a cipher so that the two of them could communicate in code.
Whoa.
He also established a secret contact name for himself. If Stuart ever needed to contact Hicks covertly, he would identify himself as Emu.
Yo, this is only funny to me because I understand the Emu Wars in Australia. That's a thing, man.
If you don't know about the Emu Wars, you need to Google it.
That's amazing. The emus should not be underestimated.
No. So according to Hicks's notes on these conversations, Stuart also admitted that he had become obsessed with creating memorable interactions everywhere that he went, because he wanted people to remember he was there. He wanted witnesses and stories so that if he was ever accused of another crime, somebody might remember seeing him and give him an alibi. This paranoia was no longer just a belief, it was becoming a lifestyle. And yet, despite all of this, Stuart insisted that he was trying to go straight. According to Stuart, he and Billy McCulkin had left crime behind. Now, their version of going straight appears to have differed somewhat from the conventional definition. While working a legitimate job at a hospital, Stuart filed a workman's compensation claim after reporting that a floor polisher had struck him in the chest and injured him. Later, he admitted that no floor polisher was involved. The injury had actually been inflicted by McCulkin, deliberately. The pair had allegedly concocted a scheme so that Stuart could collect compensation benefits without having to do any actual real work.
So he beat his friend's ass for money?
And because true friendship is built on mutual support, Stuart later returned the favor by injuring McCulkin so that he could pursue his own fraudulent claims.
This is mutually beneficial, question mark.
So while the pair may have been retired from certain criminal activities, they had apparently not abandoned the concept entirely. Crime, it seems, was still very much a team sport. Before long, our workers' compensation fraud duo actually started inviting Detective Hicks over to McCulkin's house for chats. After all, they were both out of work and apparently had plenty of free time for networking. And the conversations wandered all over the place. Future business ventures they were considering. Old grievances, conspiracies, the usual. Stuart also informed Hicks that he found himself a new girlfriend named Sue. Now, Stuart had neglected to introduce himself to Sue as John Stuart, recently released criminal with a long history of arrests.
That's exactly how I was going to say it.
Instead, he introduced himself under an alias and claimed to be a fifth-year medical student.
That sounds better.
Sue reportedly believed the story for about a month. And then, when she was at the police station reporting an accident, she happened to notice a photograph of her boyfriend hanging on the wall.
Hey, I got that in my wallet.
Which is not generally how most people discover they've been dating under an assumed identity, but for many women, this probably would have been the end of the relationship, a big giant red flag. But Sue appears to have been made of sterner stuff, and she stayed with him.
Props to you for your stick-to-itiveness.
Meanwhile, Detective Hicks continued visiting McCulkin's house and documenting Stuart's increasingly strange interactions. And while Stuart was assuring Hicks that he was trying to build a legitimate life, his evenings suggest he may have had a slightly different career path in mind. Night after night, Stuart could be found moving through Brisbane's nightclub scene, including a club you've probably heard of by now, the Whiskey A Go-Go. According to various accounts, Stuart had a habit of arguing with management, threatening staff, and getting himself thrown out. Which sounds less like a man trying to stay out of trouble and more like a man treating nightclub ejections as a competitive sport.
Yeah, who hasn't been to Hooters on Tuesday at noon?
But over time, the confrontations evolved, and the threats became more specific. The demands became more financial, and it began to look less like random troublemaking and more like something else, because if Stuart's stories are to be believed, he wasn't just looking for attention anymore. He was looking for money. And if that was the case, John Stuart may have been trying to reinvent himself as Brisbane's newest standover man. And then, just to place the cherry on top of this increasingly bat Sunday, Stuart called Detective Hicks with an update. According to Stuart, Lenny McPherson had come to Brisbane. Yes, that Lenny McPherson, the man that Stuart believed had framed him. The man Stuart had spent years insisting wanted him dead. The man he was allegedly so afraid of that he wouldn't answer doors if the lighting conditions were unfavorable. Apparently, that same Lenny McPherson now wanted to meet with Stuart, not to kill him or to threaten him or to settle old scores, but to discuss a business opportunity. Quite the plot twist. Stuart told Hicks that he believed McPherson wanted to partner with him. And even with the animosity and history between the two men, including one of them allegedly framing the other for an attempted murder that he allegedly didn't commit, Stuart thought this was a perfectly plausible story that Hicks would buy into. Remember, it's widely reported that McPherson eliminated his rivals by feeding information to police about them and pointing investigations toward, the most convenient targets, specifically his organized crime rivals. That was his racket. And then here was Stuart regularly meeting with Detective Hicks, supplying information, sharing rumors, naming names, and positioning himself as the source of criminal intelligence. Whether he realized it or not, Stuart appeared to be playing from the same playbook that he claimed McPherson had written. The question now is, if Stuart is informing, is he trying to duplicate McPherson's business plan and make some money off of it, or is Stuart informing for survival and protection? Not long afterwards, Stuart and Sue headed off on a little holiday. The reason for this holiday depended on who was asking. According to Stuart, he was getting out of town because he was concerned about trouble involving a man named Hannay. We mentioned him in an earlier episode. He was one of the Whiskey A Go-Go managers. Stuart claimed police might be looking into some of Hannay's recent activities, and he wanted to avoid finding himself caught up in anything further. Not a lot of explanation there, but hang with me. Stuart's family received a different explanation. According to them, Stuart was heading off to collect an illegal Chinese immigrant to transport him to Brisbane for $500.
Is that like a lot more in Australia?
I have no idea.
Because that doesn't sound like a lot for human trafficking and all.
Now, as we've established, John Stuart often had multiple versions of the same story, and it was during this trip that one of his strangest habits began to emerge: the postcards. Throughout his journey, Stuart mailed postcards to Detective Hicks documenting his movements, where he had been, when he had been there, and what he had been doing. In one postcard, Stuart explicitly stated that these cards were intended to establish alibis for particular dates and times. Most people send postcards as vacation souvenirs, but John Stuart was using them to create some sort of paper trail, a time-stamped record. Evidence, just in case he needed it. And while he was busy documenting his whereabouts, he was also allegedly committing crimes along the way. This trip featured a greatest hits collection of questionable decision-making, including stolen wallets, stolen luggage, break-ins, and thefts from hotel safes. Then, because apparently the itinerary was not full already, Stuart spent part of the return journey setting a series of brush fires along the way home.
What? Like what?
Yeah.
Just for
Just stopping and setting fire.
Just for flavor? Just cause?
Just cause.
Why not? You're already chaos.
Well, every relaxing holiday deserves a little arson.
So no, man.
According to Stuart, it did. So when Stuart returned to Brisbane, his meetings with Hicks resumed, and so did the stories. According to Stuart, Lenny McPherson had arrived in Brisbane and was attempting to establish himself in the local nightclub scene. Stuart presented himself as something of the reluctant guardian. He claimed he'd been visiting these clubs and speaking with the owners and managers and warning them about the dangers of the protection rackets and standover men that McPherson was threatening them with. He also made sure Hicks understood one very important detail. If anyone accused Stuart of running a protection racket himself, they would be mistaken, because he was offering to protect these nightclubs, but he wasn't asking for money. He wasn't intimidating the nightclub owners. He was just trying to become Brisbane's newest
Batman
guardian. According to Stuart, he was just looking out for everyone's best interest. It was a public service, really.
Oh, you have a Batmobile and everything, might as well.
Now, at this point, you might be noticing a recurring theme. Whenever John Stewart's behavior looked suspiciously like a crime, he almost always had an alternative explanation ready. And in Stewart's version of events, he was never the villain. He was the whistleblower and the victim. The misunderstood hero trying to warn everybody before it was too late. Which admittedly is exactly what he would later claim about the Whiskey A Go-Go fire. But the Little brothers, who owned both the Whiskey A Go-Go and the Brisbane nightclub called Checkers, did not appear to be in the market for freelance protection services because they had bigger problems. Specifically, they were buried in debt. By this point, both clubs were reportedly in such dire financial condition that liquidators had stepped in and assumed control of management. The Littles blamed much of this financial disaster on one of their managers, that man named Hannay. According to them, Hannay had been stealing from the clubs and mismanaging their finances for years, so they fired him, and a fraud investigation followed. And those investigators naturally wanted to examine the financial records, which sounds straightforward enough, except those records were reportedly stored in a shop that was owned by Hannay, and before the investigators could thoroughly examine them, that shop happened to burn down.
Whoops.
Destroying the records. What suspiciously unfortunate timing. So even if the Little brothers believed that they needed protection, there was a problem because they didn't have any money. The clubs were broke. So it really didn't matter whether Lenny McPherson, John Stewart, or anyone else was trying to stand over Brisbane's nightclub scene, because nobody was getting paid, at least not from the Little brothers. And when Stewart's offers of protection went unheeded, things started heating up, literally. And that's where we'll continue next week on Foretold, Australia's Whiskey A Go-Go fire, right here on Crime to Burn.
You're going to make my voice sound like rich Corinthian leather.
That's my goal.
It's going to smell like mahogany and madness.
Better than mahogany and madness, I guess.
Gotta have a jazz flute.
I'll try to behave. No promises, but I'll make an effort.
I was thinking about my own penis tattoo.
You don't have a penis tattoo.
I do too. It says "Y" most of the time. And sometimes it says "Welcome to Jamaica, have a nice day."
What was it from?
I stole it somewhere, I don't remember now. And I'm a problem, and I could really use some solution.
Alcohol's the solution.
And I don't really give out kudos. Like, that's pretty rare. I'm very stingy with my kudos. I'm also stingy with props, big ups, and congratulations. Roll that. I'm going to sneeze probably in the next 30 seconds. Possibly. Now it's 50-50. Man, the numbers are moving all over the board.
I'm on the edge of my seat.
What would you chat about if you could chat? If you would chat? If chat could chat? Would.
Today we're examining the event. Sorry.
Let's examine that up close. It seems weird to start a sentence with the word meat. I'm the meat.
Not right now. When we're done recording.
Give me 10 seconds, but count it real slow.
I will allow you to go pee.
What would it look like if you weren't allowed?
Probably a puddle on the floor. eventually. This episode's brought to you by corruption, turning organized crime into a public-private partnership. This episode's brought to you by corruption, helping criminals, police, and politicians achieve their goals through teamwork. This episode's brought to you by pathological demand avoidance.
I got that stuff. That's for real. That is a serious problem. Macaulay Culkin has a dick tattoo?
No, Billy McCulkin.
Tell me there's not a penile rodent or will not f***ing sleep. Stand over your man.
What was that?
The world's falling apart. I think it really shot off of it.
That's what she said. But you know what happens when I have 2 drinks?
I hope your pants fall off. Some Tuesday mornings, you just need a high colonic and some sun on your taint. More better barrier.
A long-term more better barrier.
Yeah.
Sounds like a birth control ad.
This episode is brought to you by penis tattoos. Making sure no true crime story remains dignified for very long. Yeah, you got a short entendre and a long entendre. This episode is brought to you by penis tattoos. The detail absolutely nobody asked for, and yet somehow is a matter of historical record. You could just sun your taint. You don't have to tat your dick. Very profound.
Thanks for your wisdom.
You're welcome. I'm a benevolent asshole. Your metaphors touched my metaphors.
So starting to get
metaphors.
Starting to get freaky. Accidentally transported an illegal immigrant
Possibly.
for money.
No.
See, he was doing it for money. Like, is there like a penny saver ad for that? Like,
It's a Craigslist session for that.
I don't think there was Craigslist in 73. I don't know if there was penny saver in 73.
Oh, that's right. We're going way back into dense bush. I don't even know. How can you see the labia for the trees? Like, talk nerdy to me. There's a song about that. I just haven't written it yet.
Wait, where's your wax stick thing?
What? Whack?
The thing that you bought, the sound effect thing.
Oh, what
What's
do you
it
call it? A
called?
wax stick?
I don't know remember what it was called. It's
That's a vibra slap.
a vibra slap. See, wax stick, vibra slap. It sounds the same.
Wah, 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 wah.
It's moving so fast I can't tell what it's doing.
I bestow this vibra slap upon you. Use it wisely.
So wait, I just slap it? See, you do it better
Kind of
than me.
weak on the delivery, right?
I gotta work on my pimp slap.
Well, I was born with a really strong pimp hand. Disrobe and it. No,
Nope.
it's too much.
That's not
Too
gonna be
much,
it.
Too much. Repent.
Please forgive me.
I will absolve you of your sins, my child,
All right.
if you will make me a cheese sandwich. I've never had a penis tattoo do anything to me.
Me neither.
That's a pretty good sign off.
There you go. Crime to Burn is a production of Crime to Burn LLC, where we light fires in your brain and not your buildings. All rights reserved.